And I'm going to run through a handful of announcements for the group just for Meetup in general before I introduce Richard and let him head off on his talk. I do want to start off with Zoom since we're in the Zoom webinar for everyone. So like I mentioned, the difference between the Zoom webinar is, you're seeing myself and Richard. Nobody else is on camera or audio. So you have two functions across the bottom, those buttons that are across the bottom. One is the normal chat function, so feel free to use the chat to share comments, share links, share where you're connecting from, which is what most people are doing right now to get started. But do make sure that you change in the chat that your to is to everyone so that we can all see your posts. Otherwise, the default, for some reason in Zoom, the default is only to hosts and panelists, so only Richard and I would be able to see that. The other new function in Webinar is a Q&A function. And so this is where if you have questions, we're going to do Q&A at the end of Richard's talk. I want you to post those questions in the Q&A section because that's where I'm going to be pulling questions and moderating those at the end of the talk so that we can really sort of organize questions for Richard. And the other function is you can see everybody else's questions that they've posted in the Q&A section and vote up your favorites. So the favorites, the ones that have the most votes, will float to the top, and we'll start with those questions. So like I said, the first one is what everybody's doing in the chat now is you switch over to everyone and share where you're connecting from and entering that in the chat window just to get used to using the chat window. So just a quick introduction to me, if you don't know who I am. My name's Randy Crum, and so I'm a DataViz designer. I'm the founder and president of a DataViz company called InfoNewt. I wrote the book called Cool Infographics, and I run the website called Cool Infographics. I teach DataViz and storytelling at SMU. It's an online 12-week certificate program, which I'll mention here in just a second. And I also am the organizer of the local DataViz meetup groups in Dallas and in Austin. And in the beginning of 2021, I started what we're now calling these global DataViz meetup events, where online events, since they're online during the pandemic, that anybody can dial in from. You don't have to be just in the local group. And so you saw the map earlier that we now have 21 cities that are participating in that global meetup sort of activity, that event. So this is my certificate course. It's 12-week certificate program. You can find out more at smu.edu/dataviz. I only run it twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall. So the next session won't start until September. And so you can find out all kinds of information there or through me or on my website. These are currently the 21 cities across the globe that have participated, are helping promote or share. We have now combined of these 21 groups, we have more than 50,000 DataViz meetup members that now have access to some of this online content because during the pandemic, a number of groups obviously couldn't have in-person events and just stopped holding events during the pandemic. So this is one way that we can continue to provide some DataViz content to a lot of these members and keep these communities alive and going. I will reiterate to help continue to support your local meetup groups. Your local meetup groups need your support. They're all volunteers. They're all free groups. They're all meant to be building local DataViz communities. And so you can use the groups if either you are looking for work or you're at a company that's hiring. Every meetup group has a page on meetup.com that has a discussion board. If you just scroll down to the bottom of the group page, there's a whole place there where you can post discussions to the entire group. And so what I highly suggest, you're welcome to post if you're looking for work or if you're hiring here in the chat in the window, and you reach the 90 people globally that are here in attendance, but use your local meetup group. You're going to reach more people that way. I know in Dallas we have 4,500 members. I know New York is much bigger, San Francisco is much bigger, DC is much bigger. And so use that discussion board to either post if you're looking or post if you have an open job, and use that local community. Use that all the time. So that's one way you can use your local community. The other one is, I know on the Cool Infographics website, I do maintain a jobs board. So if you have a job, feel free to send it to me. There's a link there to send me any open positions, and I'll put them on the site. That's free to do as well. But you can also just look there. So I'm posting DataViz related jobs from all over the world there. So it's a good place to just sort of keep your eye on it. And then finally, I do want to thank our sponsor. Our sponsor tonight is going to be Food Truck. And you may not have heard of Food Truck. Food Truck is creating a new website where DataViz designers can basically market their DataViz charts and make them available for basically syndication. They're like stock photos, but charts where other people can then take that chart and put it on their website and share it and make it that way. However, I do know I wanted to announce that they have launched a DataViz contest for the month of June. This geospatial and time contest. I have a little bit of details. I know that they're providing the data, but you can use any tool you want, tool or code. It's going to be open for the entire month of June. The deadline is June 30th. And that the prizes are going to include a $200 gift card. They're going to give away some T-shirts, and they're going to share all the entries and all the work so that your work gets circulated within the industry. And the data set is going to be visualizing real estate data with the intent of communicating to multiple different audiences. You can see all of those, not statistics, but all the details of the contest, because I would encourage everybody to go take a look and see if this is something that's interest of you, and if it's a way you want to showcase some of your work. Go to this bit.ly link. So it's bit.ly/June-geospatial is how to get to their contest page that has all of the details and the links to the data, and even some links to some tools you can use for geospatial data and that sort of stuff if you've never even tried geospatial data. There's some really easy ways to dive into that. Okay, so wrapping that up, I want to introduce Richard. So if you don't know Richard, Richard is a longtime data visualization designer. Currently working at Uncharted Software. How long have you been at Uncharted Software, Richard? It's been a long time.
20 years. 20 years, yes.
20 years. Wow. Okay. Also authored 2 books. One co-author was called Graph Analysis and Visualization. And then your most recent book last year was Visualizing with Text. There's the first one. And there's the brand new one, Visualizing with Text. Fantastic. Which I think, I don't want to step on your parade, is really the basis of all the text visualization of Alice in Wonderland. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you turn yours on.
And I'm going to start sharing.
And while he's doing that, just as a reminder to everybody, if you want to use the chat, feel free to use the chat throughout the talk. Comments, links, if something comes up, that kind of thing. But if you have a question, we're going to do Q&A at the end of Richard's talk. Try to keep that focused in the Q&A section, and you can upvote your favorite questions in there, and we're going to use the questions from the Q&A section at the end of Richard's talk. So I will mute Richard and let you take it away.
Okay, very good. So you should be able to hear me just fine. And hi, everybody. I'm Richard Brath. Today, I'll be presenting 72. I'm actually going to give you 2 more than promised visualizations from Alice in Wonderland. Actually, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is the more appropriate title to use here. So slides should advance here when I click. There we go. The first question you might have is, who are you? You may be asking. And who am I? As Randy said, I've been working in visualization here at a company called Uncharted Software for 20 years. By day, I create visualizations. As you see some of these examples on the left here, we do them for companies that are giant companies down to small startups. These are data-driven interactive visualizations embedded into software platforms. And we're often building visualizations on top of large-scale, complex data sets, and there's often a machine learning component as well. And we're creating these for domain experts who are people potentially like baseball players or COVID researchers or news analysts and so forth. In addition, I'm very interested in text and how text can be used in visualization. And so I completed a PhD starting in 2013, all about visualizing with text. And then I also created the book that I was just holding up a few moments ago called Visualizing with Text, that is available on all kinds of independent bookstores as well as Amazon, of course. This presentation that I'm giving today isn't specifically from the book, but a lot of the elements thematically are discussed in the book as well. So why are we interested in visualizing with text at all? Why do we even care about that? So we'll start by backing up a little bit and doing a recap on data visualization, which is the favorite subject of everybody at these meetups. We use these data visualizations every day. We take tables like you can see on the left, and we transform the data into visual representations, and we're using things like size and color. And you see that on the right. And those visual representations help us see the patterns and relationships in the data. So for example, in the top map, you can see Biden has some success in the West and Rust Belt that were potentially toss-up states. And we can see there's a relationship and a shape pattern in the lower plot that is a set of a visualization showing the relationship between birth rates and death rates around the world by different countries. So we have this great ability to create these wonderful visualizations, and there's many, many, many different kinds of data visualizations that we all know and love. These are just a few from D3JS from Mike Bostock's library. Now, what about text? So what happens when your data is text? The simple answer is you can count your words, and that's your data. And then once you have data, you can draw it in many different ways that we were just looking at a few moments ago. And the most famous way of doing that then is to use a word cloud, right? And the size of the text in the word cloud is how frequently the word occurs in the text, right? We know that. What's the color? Well, the color actually doesn't correspond to any data at all. It's just arbitrary. And what about the position? Well, actually, the position is just arbitrary too. And the angle of a text, well, that's actually arbitrary too. So even though you can create something that's visually engaging, it actually doesn't tell you very much about the text. You're not really getting a huge amount out of this visual representation. So are there other text visualizations that we can work with? And there are some sites where people have collected examples of text visualizations. This is from an academic site that's pulled in lots of different little thumbnails from different academic research papers on visualization that are talking about text. And you may notice a few things here from some of these snapshots. There's actually a few hundred of them on the site. This is just a few of them. A lot of these visualizations actually look like the data visualizations that we just saw 2 slides ago. In other words, they're very data-centric. They don't necessarily have a lot of text in them, even though they're about text. So that might get you to thinking like, maybe there's more, maybe there's some things that are missing. Maybe there's additional things that could be done. And why should we care about visualizing text? We should care about visualizing the text because it's a basic communication tool that we all use. And right now, the last couple of years, we've seen that our language channel, our communication channels are being interrupted by various groups who want to disrupt society. They're doing things like fake news or scams or phishing or disinformation campaigns, and they're creating problems. And we need to figure out better ways how to look at and understand language to better deal with these evolving situations that we have. So if we are interested then in visualizing text, how might we go about and find other ways of doing that? What are some other techniques that we can use for visualizing text? And we want to find a lot of different techniques to do these visualizations, right? The challenge is that there's a massive number of visualizations that are out there now, right? We've got people who've been doing maps and, for hundreds of years. Bar charts have been around also for hundreds of years, and pie charts as well. Lots of emerging techniques over the last 30 years. And you could easily just get stuck on like the latest trend or just some little area or niche of expertise. And so how do you break out of that box and kind of get a sense, a breadth of lots of different kinds of things? We want to get some kind of cross-section through here. How do we do that? One way to do that, if we are interested in finding lots of very different things, is to focus narrowly, say pick one data set, and see how other people have solved that one problem. And so you're going to find a lot of creativity in terms of how people approach that problem. And so this is an example here from the Titanic data. This data is, it's 100 years old. It's widely published. And this particular example here that we're looking at is Michael Friendly, Jürgen Szymanczyk, and Ortak Onder decided to track down all the different visualizations that they could find of the Titanic data. And surprisingly, they found 24 very different visualizations. And as you can see, there's quite a few that are very different from each other, including some that came out right after it sank. This is from a newspaper. Some created with point and click tools, other ones created with statistical tools, infographics, and so on. So it's pretty interesting, the variety that is created here just of the Titanic data set. Now, here's another example. This one is by a person named Jacques Bertin. He was one of the founders of modern data visualization in the 1960s, and he used a similar approach. He picked a single data set, and then what he did was he showed how he could visualize it in 90 different ways. His book is basically like a recipe book for creating visualizations, and it's become widely popular. The core crux of what you get in something like D3 or ggplot2 is built upon some of the work that he did. And so what he can do is he can show, like, look, there's all these amazing different ways of visualizing this one pretty simple data set of occupations in France. And each one of these different visualizations then is communicating something different though, right? They're revealing different patterns and different relationships in the data. And so what's interesting is both this example and the previous one about the Titanic is that the authors have focused on a singular data set, and they use that focus then of that being locked into the singular data set to push and find lots of different inventive techniques. So what we want to do from a text visualization standpoint is say, let's find text visualizations, and we'll pick one data set, and the one data set that we'll pick is Alice in Wonderland. It's been around for 150 years. It's never been out of print. It's been translated into 174 languages. It's a wildly popular book. So it's a good place for us to try and take a slice through many different kinds of visualizations. So we're going to start by finding lots of different visualizations. And mostly what I've done here is just use things like Google image search, Google Scholar search, Bing image search, and so on to find different examples. The first thing that we find is word clouds. Thousands of word clouds. So yes, word clouds are extremely popular. And if you just search for Alice in Wonderland visualization, you will get hundreds of word clouds. But if you scroll, you can find more. And you can find other interesting examples. And so what are some of those examples? Let's take a look. This first batch is from the visualization research community and the humanities research community. And so here you can see that we have examples like the word cloud, which has been around for quite a long time now. You can also see sentence tree, which is a popular technique here on the top left. I'm assuming that my cursor is coming through just fine. You can see things like graphs and connections between words. This is a technique called storylines, number 4, which plots the characters, and then the lines are adjacent whenever those characters are together. In the middle stripe here, 6 and 7 are tools for humanities scholars to look at texts in more details and compare things between different texts and do markup, or also get things like word clouds on them to be able to filter and line up the text. 8, 9, and 10 are from a thesis from a student where they're doing analysis on various different words and word usage throughout Alice. And some of these are pretty simple. I've got sentences lined up here, and we're looking at different adverbs in bold, or here there's things like capitals and italics indicating certain words of interest. So indicating additional data about those words using italics and capitalization. One of the ones I just want to focus on here for a moment is a visualization that's now 20 years old. This one is by, it's called Text Arc, and it's by Brad Paley. And so most people might not be aware of this visualization anymore, but it's a very cool early visualization of a text visualization. And what you've got going around the outside, around the perimeter here, is the entire text of Alice in Wonderland going around there. And then inside, you've got the individual words from Alice in Wonderland. And then characters, like a tag cloud, the words become larger when they're repeated more. And So we can see Alice, the Queen, the Hatter, the Mouse, and so forth. But their position is relative to where they occur in the text and also the color. So the mouse is all the way over here at the edge because the mouse just occurs over in the early chapters over here. The king occurs at the end because he's frequently talking in the final chapter of Alice in Wonderland. And the coloring is like that as well. So even when you look at the text, you can see what the coloring is to indicate where those characters are most dominant in the story. So here we're reading something early on, maybe chapter 4, the Fish Footman, and we can see some of the blue-purple text here, the Queen. So we're getting a little bit of the Queen being discussed well in advance of the Queen actually becoming dominant in the story. So very interesting way of thinking about working with text in a visualization and using color and placement to actually convey a lot more information than just the word cloud that we were looking at a few minutes ago. So the second batch here that we have is an area from computer science. Within computer science, there's a research area called natural language processing. And natural language processing is basically statistical techniques and computational techniques in AI to analyze text. And sometimes they will use the text of Alice in Wonderland in order to test out their software and see what are some of the things that they're doing. And sometimes they'll create visualizations. On the left, you can see low-level visualizations. This is basically the grammar that you see being pulled apart in their processes and then represented so that we see the subject and the predicate and then the verbs and so forth and the clauses of the text itself. We've got other visuals here that are showing different kinds of topic words that are associated with different paragraphs or characters and other kinds of relationships in here. We get into some charts that are line charts that are plotting characteristics and words and the relationships between words and so forth. So you're seeing a lot of very kind of granular visual representations here in these NLP visualizations. This particular one here is actually extracting emotions from the text. So you're looking for certain types of words that may be conveying emotions. And so we get things like disgust is one emotion and it's pretty low. Down here, there's 12 chapters. Whoever did this decided to use 20 chunks that don't then line up to chapters. But we can see, for instance, like disgust creeps up in a couple of areas in the middle section of the book, for example. We also have literary scholars who have been looking at Alice for a long time, and they've pointed me to various visualizations of Alice as well. So, one moment. They've done visualizations such as bar charts and tables and height charts and maps and so forth. This particular visualization here at the top left is looking at an early edition of Alice in Wonderland. So we've got Alice's Adventures Underground, which I believe was an early draft that Carol had created. And then Alice's Adventures in Wonderland here. And we can see that it went from something like 12,000 words to 26,000 words. The original text is in dark gray. The new text is in light gray. We can see these early chapters are almost the same as they originally started, some little sections and bits that have changed. And then somewhere around after chapter 5, you've got a whole lot of new text that is being added in here, where like chapter 6 is completely new. And you can see the little bits of text sprinkled throughout here that were pulled from the original draft through here. So that's pretty interesting and pretty granular in terms of how it's looking at the overall text. This next batch here is actually one that I really enjoy. So in the arts and computer graphics, people have much more expressive representations of what they can do when they're looking at and working with texts. Don't have time to go into all of these in detail, but there's some really fun stuff here. So number 26 on the left side is a fine arts thesis where a person, Yi Chia Cheng, converted Alice into the underlying identifying sounds. So in Portuguese, we've got these different letters stacked up here, which correspond to the different consonant and vowel sounds that you have from Alice when you take it and look at the Portuguese edition of Alice. And then you can look at the Russian edition, and you can automatically see some really big differences between Portuguese text and Russian text. The distributions in Portuguese are very centered on certain vowel sounds, are very predominant in Portuguese. So we've got these very wide, shallow distributions. And in Russian, we've got these big, tall stacks, right? So you got lots of different sounds coming out in Russian than you do in Portuguese. So really it's an analysis of language and using Alice as a basis for understanding these languages. So I think that's actually a really, really cool idea. And then number 27, this is literally taking text from Alice, the sentences themselves, and attaching those to the ability to actually draw and create representations. And so letting artists create new kinds of visualizations of Alice based out of the sentences in it. Number 30, this is a fun one where Nicholas Rougeau, hopefully I'm not mangling people's names here. What Nicholas has done is analysis for a number of different books where he actually removes all the words and simply displays the punctuation. And so what you're looking at is the characteristics of the punctuation from a lot of different books. And what's interesting is that patterns result from something like that. And in the case of Lewis Carroll did a lot of run-on sentences. So you get a lot of commas and not as many periods, for example, in something like Lewis Carroll. So that's a fun visualization. And then a technique that I really like is a technique called micrography. And basically what you're doing is you're making the text fit into different arbitrary shapes. And you're actually making it curve and line up and flow with these shapes. And so you create this really interesting, very cool effect. And it's very painful to do before computers, but this digital artist and graphics programmer figured out how to automate the entire process. And so then he's able to make these really wild shapes and color code the text in them. And I actually think it's pretty interesting too, because you create a nonlinear reading of the text. And I just wonder what would have happened to the text if Lewis Carroll actually had access to a tool like this, for example. Okay, so let's move out of some of the research examples and move into the wild. Like, what are people just doing out there when you're looking on the web at large? People doing homework assignments or college assignments or things like that. Infographics that they might be putting together. All kinds of analyses. One of the themes, one of the things that you can find a lot are timelines. And Alice changes height in the story. And so one of the things to do is make a timeline showing Alice's height at different stages in the book, for example. You can make just a timeline showing the different chapters and topics. Here's another one, number 35, where we're looking at the heights of Alice, but also looking at, what are the food items that Alice is consuming to change her height, and so forth. I really like number 36, something that I would never have considered. It's a set of small multiples, and it's a small multiple of dresses. So Alice has been around for 150 years. Lots of different editions have used different illustrators to create the illustrations in there. There's also been movies and Broadway plays and so forth. And so what's happened is different people have put Alice in different dresses over time. And this is a collection of various different dresses that Alice has seen over the 150 years. And then one that I actually really like here is this very simple one that is just showing Alice's size. We've got small multiples in here, and we can see different sizes of Alice going up and down. But then the text associated with this one is actually super interesting because it's not just text from Alice, but it's a critical analysis. The annotations here are a Freudian analysis where they're looking at size as a metaphor of Alice's adolescent transition between child and adult. So you've got this really interesting juxtaposition between quantitative data and critical analysis happening in a visualization here. Let's take a look at some more fun examples in the wild. One thing that I did not expect to find was examples of interaction, physical examples with physical interaction of Alice in Wonderland. So number 37, this is actually an activity thing for preschoolers. And so it's got lift the flaps and lists of characters where you can lift up the characters on there and so on. 38 is a carousel book. So it's like this, it's like a pop-up type thing where you got these different layers in here, and it's got summarizations of the text. So it's not the whole text of Alice in Wonderland. You just got these little summaries. 39 is lists of characters with color coding on it, and so on. 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, those are looking at character maps. So we've got the characters and a little bit about the characters and then relationships between them. And you can see there's some different variations on these different character maps in here. I particularly like this one here. This one here, we've got each of the characters with its little image on it, and then arrows between the different characters. And you can see there's a fair bit of text, like a little phrase associated with each one that explains a relationship between one character and the next. And a bit of the context for this one is this visualization comes from a costume rental website. Right, so this is visualization I never expected to find. It's completely in a different area than I never expected to see from. And why would you have a visualization showing characters and relationships on a costume website? Well, actually, it's great because if you're selling these costumes and you haven't read the text and you're going to this costume party, it's like a roadmap for you of who do you go and speak to and what's your opening line when you go speak to somebody at the costume party, right? So it's fantastic. I think that's an awesome example of visualization for social situations where you need a little bit of a jumpstart to mingle with. Some more examples from in the wild. So themes and plots are an area that people visualize. Some of these are very similar to bar charts and so forth. Then there's things that are plot diagrams, so rising action, falling action, or other analyses with more bar chart-like things, looking at logic and pun and so forth. I really like this handmade homework assignment that Sirena H. Thompson made. This is another example of wonderful things you can find on the web when you start looking, and it's a hand-drawn analysis. So when you're doing hand-drawn visualization, you can do things like, say, rising action and turn the text to be rising. And you can use a fat pen for heavyweight font and a thin pen for your lightweight font. And you can put underlines and stuff on it, and you can kind of make stuff fit when you've got long text. So it's actually a fun example from a handmade perspective. And then at the opposite end of the spectrum, there are these exquisite book editions of Alice. And here on the left, I've got an edition of Alice in Wonderland from Yayoi Kuzuma and Stephanie Posavec, a gorgeous edition there. And on the right, by, I believe, an art student, Danielle Gudita, and incredible typographic treatments that are happening in these texts with highlighting and changing the layout and wrapping and capitalization and sizing and so forth. And so, for example, in this edition, as Alice grows, literally the text is growing and getting bigger and has trouble fitting on the page as Alice grows. And then finally, here's some maps from Alice in Wonderland. So 52 and 53, these are maps where people have tried to look at the narrative and stitch together the sequence of locations and places and create a map out of that. We've all, any of us who've read Lord of the Rings is very familiar with going back and forth between the maps with Lord of the Rings from a fictional perspective, but also somebody was talking earlier about Oxford, and 54 and 55 are examples where you've got the fictional story, but also elements from Oxford creeping into the map representation. And 55 in particular actually has elements of the story superimposed over the map of Oxford and draws out locations in Oxford as well as elements from the story, putting them on top of each other, which is super interesting to try to marry those together. So I've just gone through 55 visualizations. Good time for a little pause here. And I see that somebody's asking, will the visualizations be linked somehow at the end of the presentation? Yeah, I've got a blog website, and on the blog, I've got a list of all the visualizations, and there's links to all of them if you had a favorite there that you want to go and see the original example too. So we have all of these 55 visualizations, and we could debate, some of them, are they actually visualizations? Some of them are a little borderline, but they use the visualization cues that we tend to use in visualization all the time. They use size, they use color, they use height, they use layout. And those kinds of cues are shown here in the right three columns here, the visual data representation. And you can see that the biggest number here is using these visual cues like size and color, for example, are things that we use in visualization all the time. Perhaps the interesting aspect here is when you go and you look in the wild, a lot of people are also using typographical cues to convey information. They're using things like bold and italics to encode some of that information as well. So that's a bit of an interesting difference than what you might find, say, in just normal visualization groups and communities. It's also interesting to look at how they use text. What kind of amount of text do they use in their visualizations? And so, for example, some groups use not a lot of text at all. In fact, a number of those visualizations from the natural language processing community have no words in them in the main plot area at all. It's just the lines showing, the emotions in the plot area, and everything's shifted out to, legends and labels. There are a lot of cases where labels are used in the visualization community, visualization research community. They mostly just use singular words. If we look at the arts community, they're willing to go way beyond singular words, and they're using like phrases and sentences in what they're creating and stitching together. And then in the wild, what we also see, they're using phrases and sentences, but they're not sticking to just phrases and sentences directly from the text. They're using phrases and sentences that might be summarizing something about the text, for example. And so you see very different kinds of uses of text. So all of these things are really interesting cues that you can say, oh, there's other things that we could be using when we go and we create visualizations of text. So I did say 72 visualizations in the title, so I owe you a few more. I mentioned earlier that there was this visualization pioneer, Jacques Bertin, who used a singular data set and then showed all the different visualizations that we can create. We've seen a lot of visualizations up to this point. We've seen a lot of different techniques. And so I use many examples of Alice in my book when I'm talking about visualizing with text. And so we'll show you a few more. Some of the visualizations we talked about can be really narrow in scope, working at subword, looking at fragments of words. And so one of the things that Lewis Carroll did was have made up words. So 56 here, we're looking at some of Lewis Carroll's made up words. So curiouser is not a word. He added ER onto the end of curiouser and pleasanter. Uglification, seography, so those are some of the things that he had fun with. He also has things that are little poems and songs that are in Alice in Wonderland. And so you can encode, you can create a visualization encoding that kind of focuses on those musical qualities of that text. So Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Bat, for example, the words that Lewis Carroll ever so slightly modified are in yellow here. So he didn't really change very much of Twinkle, Twinkle at all to get his fun little version. And then we also have things like bold and the baseline X height changing to indicate kind of the note pitch, and then narrow letters and wide letters to indicate shorter and longer pitches in the words, and so on. Certainly, we can visualize things at the level of words, and lots of possible examples here, and we could talk about all of these. but I don't really want to go into all of these into too much detail, but this is an example of emotions and saying, where do people fall in different emotions? This is where I am processing the text and not doing a very good job of it, because we see the queen, and if you've read Alice in Wonderland, you tend to not think of the queen as happy. You'd probably think of her as angry. So my skills at natural language processing might not be ideal there. We can look at things like character frequency, sentiment. So here we have the puppy is the happiest character and the griffin is the saddest character, where they occur in the story. So we've got our chapters in here and see where they're introduced. And there's a lot of characters that are just kind of one-shot characters. They occur just for a very short time and disappear completely, and so on. We can go outside of just looking at singular words and start looking at words that occur together. Bigrams are pairs of words that occur together. And so, oh dear, oh my, oh I, oh how are common pairs, starting with the word oh. And then the weight here is just indicating how frequent that is. So Alice says, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, a lot in the story. She also says quite forgot a lot in the story, and cried Alice is something that occurs frequently in the story as well. So those are bigrams, word pairs that we see Lewis Carroll using. Perhaps a little bit more fun than looking at those word pairs is to look at the characters and say, well, what are the descriptive words that Lewis Carroll is using with them? So here what we're doing is taking the adverbs associated with the characters. And we see Alice says things timidly or politely or eagerly. We see the queen is often described with words like furiously, uneasily, triumphantly, severely. The queen is, a very focused character there. We can see the mouse is cross, inquisitive, severe, impatient, polite. The mouse is kind of like a bipolar, either nice or not nice in his descriptions. We can move outside of Alice and start looking at data from a broader context as well. So this one is a bit more of a visualization puzzle, if you will. We've got 4 different elements of data all coming together in here about the characters. And so here we have a heavyweight font, and the heavyweight font is indicative of characters who talk a lot. So Alice, the Turtle, and the Hatter are the most frequent speakers in Alice in Wonderland. But then the next 3 data sets here are about things that are happening in Wikipedia. So the most viewed page is in a wide font, and the pages that are most viewed are like the White Rabbit and the Cheshire Cat, not Alice and the Mock Turtle and the Hatter, for example. The longest wiki pages, we got Alice, the Cheshire Hatter, the most edited pages, the Cheshire Cat, and so forth, right? So you've got all these different things going on. You've got all these different encodings going on. So if you take a look at all the characters listed here, we just got this long list of characters. And what you see is a bunch of characters that don't stand out at all. They're just kind of lightweight, they're light color, they're narrow font. So these are all Lorry, duck, dodo, eaglet. They don't really stand out. They're not really popular in any way. On the other hand, we can see like super wide text. The Cheshire Cat is super wide, right? Super wide is the most viewed wiki page, right? But it's not bold, it's not heavyweight like the other ones. So there isn't necessarily a correspondence between how much a character talks and how popular they are. So popularity doesn't necessarily relate to the amount of speaking. So this is a bit of, like I said, it's a bit of a puzzle in terms of the visual encoding. It's possible to do this. There's probably other ways to represent this, perhaps as a scatter plot or something like that. That might be a little more immediately obvious than representing it like this. We can also then go bigger than just a word or two and start looking at phrases and repetition and how things occur. So this is the top one here is a lot like a sentence tree. So we've got will you, won't you join the dance? And if you just kind of follow it linearly, you get sentence tree, but you also get these repetitions. So you've got will you, won't you, and then that wraps around to will you, won't you. Will you join the dance? So you get that. That's actually text that Lewis Carroll wrote. But once you start adding these repetitions and so forth, you can start generating text that doesn't actually occur in the book. So will you, won't you, will you, old fellow doesn't actually occur in the book at all. Here we have repeated phrases, and this is an analysis from the section where Alice is having a debate with the Mad Hatter. And so the repetition isn't just things like, I see what I eat and I eat what I see, but there's far more repetition in here. So you see the same thing, the same thing, the same thing, the same thing is repeated over and over by many characters. You might just as well say, you might just as well say, you might just as well say. So there's this incredible amount of repetition packed into a short amount of text where it's just a barrage against Alice. Cornering her textually. Here's another one where we're looking at certain words that get repeated. So when you're working with things like repetitions, you don't necessarily need to lay things out in prose where it all fits into blocks. You can start pulling some text out to the side to show things that are getting repeated over and over again. You saw already an example using emotion. So this is another example where we're using emotion. This is actually the third example using emotion. And what we have here is each chapter, 1 through 12. We've got the title of the chapter and the first sentence of the chapter. And behind the scenes, behind the text, we have a bar underneath, which is the top emotion in that chapter relative to the next highest emotion. And so now we can actually locate and say, oh, the most disgusting chapter is Pig and Pepper. By far, the angriest chapter is the Queen's Croquet Ground, where the most fear is in the Pool of Tears, and so forth. And now the last couple examples, I'm going to zoom out and zoom out even more, looking at much bigger chunks of the story itself. And so this one here is looking at the detailed text spoken from one character to another character. And so then each cell is the text that's being spoken, in this case here, from Alice to the rabbit, or Alice to the Duchess, Alice to the cat, to the Hatter, and so forth. And as you go through here, you can also see there's some text that's colored. The colored text is the repetition. So when the Queen says certain phrases over and over again, that appears in blue text, and it's probably too small through Zoom to read. You can probably guess what it is, though. In the case of the Queen, it's off with her head, off with his head, off with her head, and so on, is a favorite phrase of the Queen. Interesting that other characters also have things that they tend to repeat a lot. And in the case of Alice, you can see there's a lot of orange text, and you see that Alice frequently says, I don't know that. I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. So we've got a theme about a character who doesn't know a lot and is questioning a lot of what they understand. Zooming out even more, this is the entire text of Alice in a super teeny font on a 4K screen or printed out in a poster. This is actually readable. But when you have this whole text, you could then start to do things like use other text to orient yourself in it. So behind the text here in large letters, we have the chapter titles. And then on larger paragraphs, there's actually like what's the top character in that paragraph and what's the verb or adjective associated with that. So then we can see the Queen, 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 Griffin, Griffin, you know, down here in chapter 9 and 10, for example. And then one final example. And this is the entire text of Alice. And in this case here, what I've done is gone to about 20 different websites where they have quotes. So famous quotes and whatever, there's a lot of these different websites that are quotes from stories, so you can use them in your analysis of whatever it is that you're going to do. So I collected 200 different quotes, and basically, if the quote occurs in the text, the words go up one step in font size and up one step in font size. So the text that is most heavily quoted is going to be the largest here. And so text that isn't heavily quoted is super tiny and you can't read it, but text that is super popular on the internet is curiouser, and curiouser would be one example. So this is how the internet votes on Alice as to what the most famous parts are. Who in the world am I? Ah, that's a great puzzle. And then here we can see lots of large text in end of chapter 5 and 6. And what we're looking at is basically Alice talking to the cat. Much of that is very popular, and most popular overall is "We're all mad here," which is probably a really good way to end 72 wildly crazy visualizations from Alice in Wonderland. So here we are at the end of 72 visualizations. So what? So what? Why do we do all of that? What have we learned? Did we learn anything other than just seeing like, wow, there's an incredibly crazy variety of visualizations? So what we could learn at a minimum, you can stop doing word clouds. You can consider going beyond simple labels. We can use color and position, but we can also consider things like longer text, like sentences and paragraphs. We can consider shorter text, like syllables and letters. We consider the use of typography. These are all ingredients you can use when building visualizations out of text. So that's available to us. And here's the recap. There's 72 little visualizations all crammed onto one screen. You'll notice again that the variety is incredibly vast. And so one last piece of advice is the kind of advice that you'll get almost at the beginning of anything about visualization. And that is there's a lot possible. So you need to know what your user's goal is. If you understand who your user is when you're creating a visualization, then that's going to help steer you what's the right direction to go in and what are the things that you could add and should add, or maybe should subtract if you're getting too much away from the goal of where you're going to. And so with that, I'll say thanks. I hope you enjoyed this whirlwind tour. I certainly enjoyed putting all of these together. With regards to the question about the links, you can find the links on my blog. So you can see there, richardbrath.wordpress.com. There's all kinds of things on there, including there's, I think, a menu on the top that has a link to books. You'll find a link to this book. In that link, there will be links to all of you can find the resources there for all of these from Alice in Wonderland. You can also find a blog post. I think it was in the last 4 months, 5 months, that I had a blog post specifically about this, where I listed all of the links for these visualizations from Alice in Wonderland. I do tweet on rare occasions, not that often. So you can find me there, and you can find the book if you're interested in the book at all on Amazon and independent booksellers. And if the company was at all interesting, the company is called Uncharted Software. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Fantastic, Richard. Thank you so much. You want to take a deep breath and take a sip?
Absolutely.
I think your blog post was from October of last year, and originally,
yeah, I've been updating it.
Is that right?
Yes, it was 58. Now it's 72.
Yeah, 50. So I'm going to share that link. And you said then it was 10 plus more.
And there's a few more to that.
More to it, right? And so all those links are at the very bottom of the post. There's a very exhaustive list of your references that you did. So those are all there. So there's that link to that, because I know that was a common question. So
Great.
related to that, Richard, is this slide deck going to be available anywhere?
That's a good question. I think I can. I'm not sure. The one challenge here is that I'm pulling lots of different things from other people's work that's not my own work. And so when you use things at a small size, you're probably okay from copyright and fair use. When you start using things at a large size, you start treading into a gray area on copyright. And so that's why I would refer people to particularly the other examples, which I think is perhaps
it'll be in the video.
Interesting parts. Yeah, the interesting parts here is, you can get all of these links way down here, right? So if we pick any one of these,
right, you can get to the original.
We're right back to the original, right? So there's the one that we were looking at on this is characters. This is one of the NLP ones that I just happened to click through on. So they're all back here. And I would also point out that if anybody's interested, I showed a number of different examples. Some of those examples I have links to under the book section. So how did you actually code something like that? Well, here's the code if anybody's interested in what we do with HTML and CSS to get something that looks like that.
Okay, wide variety of questions. So you said you don't tweet much. Let's just start with, I put the link to your
tweet
blog
sometimes
in the chat. I mean, but is that the right place if someone wanted to follow or connect with you? Is Twitter the right place, or what's the best place to?
You can try, if it's just a quick short question, sure, you can put something in Twitter. If it's a long question, you can find me at uncharted.software. You can email me that way and reach me through Uncharted, absolutely. So there's a couple of points there. There might be an email address somewhere in the blog. I'm not sure where that might be in the blog. I see a couple other questions on here coming in too. So why Alice in particular?
Q&A. We can run through those. If
Sure.
anybody has any other questions, feel free to continue to drop them into the Q&A, but we can go through these. So Desiree wanted to ask why Alice in particular was the focus of this.
Right. So as discussed, I wanted to find one data set. And what data set could I use from a text? And my original thinking actually was Harry Potter. A lot of people have used Harry Potter in some of these things since I was in their analyses of what they've done. Since I was writing a book and a book is published and you're exposed to copyright, and we know J.K. Rowling probably has like $1 billion or who knows how much money now. I quickly said, yeah, no, I don't want to do Harry Potter. Like, I need something different than that. And so what other popular books are there? You could do the Bible, but like that's also a very sensitive one. You want to be careful what you extract, from the Bible. If you do your emotion and sentiment and come up with something strange out of that, you don't want to have to be defending that. So Alice is actually really good because it's been around for a very long time. It reaches a very wide audience from children to adults. So you do get things like that homework assignment that popped out, a bunch of different homework assignments that pop out because of that. It's been in so many different languages, and it's a good one to use. You're looking for something that's been widely used. It was the basis for choosing Alice as opposed to something that look, here's a book on my desk. You probably would not want to use this book as the basis for doing text analysis, right? Because it's probably not that widely read.
Not many examples to work from.
Yeah. So where did you get the data set, and what tools did you use to access, clean it, and analyze it? Good question. In terms of looking at these old texts, Project Gutenberg is an online repository of all kinds of books that are out of copyright. They're all in just simple ASCII format, which means from a programming perspective, if you can do a little bit of programming, you can pull that text into tools, all kinds of tools. Mostly I did things using D3.js, so JavaScript is mostly what I did. I also used Python for some of the examples. Very early on, I used Excel sometimes because you can write formulas in Excel and do some stuff to extract interesting things from text. So Project Gutenberg was what I used for the actual data source. And I would caution you there that there are multiple editions of Alice. So if you make multiple different visualizations and you use different texts as your starting point, you may find differences between them, and it can drive you really crazy when you start to then try to normalize that later on downstream. So we all know about dirty data. Well, with books, there's different editions, and make sure you pick one edition and stick with it.
Could you tell from the visualizations you found which version they were based on?
Certainly when I was trying to reconcile some stuff downstream, like I got different patterns for the emotions from different texts. And I was, there was some head scratching there, like how come it came out different this time? So there's that. So you have the text, and then text, you need to like turn text into words. And then sometimes you want to differentiate and find nouns and proper nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs. So to find things like adverbs and adjectives and stuff like that, I would use either in Python. There are libraries available to do natural language processing. Spacy and NLTK are two libraries that you can use in Python. In JavaScript, there's a fun little module that is a very lightweight module for doing text processing called compromise.js. And so that is what's used to kind of take the big text and turn it into the bits that you can actually then start to work with. And then from there, you're just writing code to do the visuals, like using D3, for example, to create the visuals. So that's the pieces that are used to create the visualizations that I made. I'm sure out of the 55 examples that I showed, though many of those used other tools.
I love just diving into like data cleanup into the details, because I'm sure the libraries handle things like plural or capitalizations, yes. And you gotta make sure the different forms of the word actually count together, past tense.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, they do all of that stemming and lemmatization, and there's all kinds of linguistic concepts that they handle for you in the tools, so you don't have to do those. So it's good to use those tools.
All right. So Elaine was asking about the illustrations in Alice in Wonderland. So had you come across any of those?
So I kind of sidestepped around the illustrations, other than the example with the dresses. So Alice is also famous because the original illustrator of the book, John Tenniel, I might be mispronouncing that, created these wonderful illustrations, and he was famous caricaturist of the day, and that also helped sell many copies of Alice. But then with different editions, people have added different illustrations and put different illustrations in there, and there have been very many different illustrators of Alice over the years. And I don't know of like a website or a clearinghouse of like, here's all the different illustrators of Alice. I would probably start by looking at Wikipedia to see if Wikipedia had any good, listing of different editions of Alice. And then from there, actually the second place would be the Lewis Carroll Society. So there is the Lewis Carroll Society in the UK and the Lewis Carroll Society in North America. And the Lewis Carroll Society, so I mentioned literary scholarship, the Lewis Carroll Society has a newsletter that they publish about Lewis Carroll, not just Alice in Wonderland. And that's been going on for decades, that newsletter. So if you were so inclined, you could find many pointers in those newsletters over the years. I believe most of the newsletters are available also on archive.org. So if you look at, do a search for Lewis Carroll Society, and then you can probably track it down that way.
Yeah, so I just put the link to the Lewis Carroll Society of North America in the chat.
That's great. I'm glad you're putting all of these in as live as we go along.
As fast as I can. All right, so Gabe asks, circling back to the beginning, how do you think these visualization concepts, now that you've gone through all these different versions, can now be applied to things like fake news and other text, really topics or targets of the analysis?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think there's a number of different ways that could come in. So for instance, fake news, for example, may be driving people more towards emotion and using much stronger emotional words than mainstream media, for example. So this might not quite be exactly fake news. It's not lining up perfectly here. But in mainstream media, authors, journalists are taught to write in a certain way. And they'll be very factually orientated and not necessarily trying to trigger emotions. Whereas if you were trying to get an emotional response from people, you would use more emotional words, right? And so then you could highlight the text and do some of these techniques to bring out all the emotional words. You could start to look at and say, if I want to get people to respond logically, then I'm going to have a certain style. If I want people to respond emotionally, I'm going to have a certain style. And you can be trying to short circuit people by engaging their emotions, for example, and you can mark up the story and show ones that are much more heavily emotive in their writing than others. So that would be one example. There could be all kinds of different possibilities in there, but that would be one.
Right. Eric's question is just right up your alley, right? So any examples that would highlight bad practices or pitfalls to watch out for when creating a visualization? And I'm extrapolating to these visualizations of text.
Yeah. Boy, it's really easy to
Did
make.
you mention that in your book?
Yes, I do. There's a checklist at the end of the book. So, well, gee, Randy, thanks for helping me advertise the book. I actually do have a little checklist at the very end of the book that says, make sure you've got this. Be careful about that. So like literally, it says here, opportunity and checklist in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's little bits in here about, oh, does this need to go into different languages? You better worry about languages. You better worry about things like contrast. Don't use yellow text on a white background, and so on and so on and so on. So that would be one. I think the other point that I made was, be really careful about who your audience is. Your audience is going to drive a lot of what you do and don't do. And so like that one example that I showed with the words, where the words were bold and different weights and different widths and, different colors. And there's like lots of different stuff going on all at once, that works for certain kinds of visualizations. If you're just trying to make something that's going to engage people in 30 seconds on a website or on a, in a TV clip or something like that, a YouTube clip, you're going to lose people really fast if there's too many different things going on all at once. So that would be a word of caution. But that would come right back from your user task, right? If your task was, I need to communicate something rapidly to an audience, you're not going to go down that way. If I need to do really deep analysis, then maybe that plus some interaction would be useful.
Okay.
And I see interaction is the very next question.
It is.
Yes.
So we're going to use visualizations interactive, which I know a couple of them were. And then what do you, how do you think interactivity could add to the text analysis?
So definitely some of the examples where I even mentioned the physical interaction, which caught me by surprise. Brad Paley's early one, I think, was a very cool early interactive visualization. Sentence tree, there's things you can do with sentence tree to interact with that. I'm just showing all static snapshots of these, finding the interactive versions and using interactive versions is another whole layer of challenge when you're just trying to collect all of these different things. In terms of the examples that I have, I think there's cases where you want to be able to definitely interact with them. So that example where I had like 4 different things all going on at once, you're going like overload. I'd like to turn all of those off and just use weight only. And then if I just use weight only, it'd be like, oh, it's pretty clear which ones are heavy and which ones are light, right? Or just use color only. And so just be able to subtract and add things out. Things like tooltips are super useful and important because sometimes you're looking at the text and you're going like, well, why did this come out? What happened here? So I had the example where I had the character and the adverb, right? So Alice was timid and the queen was furious and whatever. And so it makes a nice little plot, but you want to say like, maybe there's an unexpected word where the queen was pleasant. You're going like, well, what was that? So if you just point at that, the tooltip can show you like, oh, here's all the instances of those sentences. And it's like, oh, like it was some other different context. Like I could see the full sentence here in the tooltip. And so the tooltip would be another simple example in, basic visualization. Certainly the click and link throughs, back to the full text or having multiple different visuals at the same time. You saw that in some of the linguistic analysis texts. It was like example, probably 5 or 6, 7, something like that. They have the different panels, right? And you could click a word and you would highlight the text on the other side and vice versa, right? So those become very useful for analytical types of tasks.
Okay. I'm not sure. So Ahmed asked, what's the ratio of find versus make in your personal work when surveying for a particular problem? And I guess what he's asking is, how often do you go looking for what other people are doing for inspiration versus just make your own visuals and visualize it a couple different ways to see what works?
So it's a good question, and it's very apropos to kind of a design question. What is the design process? And so, I could back up and say, ultimately, this book that I created is born out of the frustration of not really understanding text and how and when and where and why to use text in visualization. And so there was partially a design process to go and look at lots of other examples to help understand different ways that text was being used. So you kind of saw that thread going through there with the 55 examples showing, different ideas. And then you see at the same time the make side. And so I would say my background comes from both design and computer science. And the design side of me is that I want to go and look at lots of examples before I commit. Sometimes I have a pretty good idea of an approach that's going to work, but particularly if you're having trouble finding a fit or something doesn't feel like it's working, that's when you want to go and look at even more examples and get an even broader set of possible ideas and having a bigger context to work with. And so I'll just use that as an opportunity to say, if I can find it quickly, so when I said, you can use typography, you can use, all of these different things in here. I kind of summarize that into like a single giant image in the book. So for me, then as a designer, this one page here from the book, figure 2.13, which you can find on the book's website. It's publicly available. You don't have to buy the book just to get this one image. Kind of itemizes all of those different things that you can use, like capitalization, italics, weight, spacing, phrases, different layouts, and so forth, are all possibilities that you can use and combine and work with in different ways. So that gives me, as a designer, kind of more ingredients that I can play with, and I can kind of figure out different recipes from that. So creating that list of ingredients was really important to me as a designer. And that was a lot by looking at other examples and trying to create things and seeing where they break and fail to help understand where to go to next, or what I don't understand.
Is it sort of a playground, like a sandbox for you to say, does it fit into these different ways to try it? And,
right.
Yep.
Yep. And then I see one last question here. Are there resources for designers?
Are there resources? Yep, go ahead.
Are there resources for designers?
Because people can't see the question, so go ahead and read it out.
Want to collaborate. Are there resources for designers who might want to collaborate with data visualization providers? I guess it depends what kind of collaboration you're looking for. If you're looking for, like, I just need someone to help me write code to process text and do NLP, because I'm not an NLP researcher and I know absolutely nothing about coding, then that might be, who can I reach out to maybe at a university or college or something like that who does that? Or maybe I can reach out to somebody within a meetup group who has those capabilities. If it's like, I really like that idea and I want, ggplot in R to add something that you showed, Richard, then I think you have to, email one of the creators of ggplot. Or if it's Tableau or whatever tool it is, and you have to go back to the tool and say, hey, tool provider, is this something that you might consider? And I would say that they probably have many, many of those emails that might not be at the very top of their list. I should probably use the third answer here as well and say, there are companies like ours that do a lot of coding and build up visualizations, but we're not doing, like, as a company, the kinds of visualizations we create are the things that take, months to build in teams of like 4 or 5 people to build, not necessarily things that are like 1 or 2 days to build. Just because the scale of the data is enormous. We might be dealing with hundreds of thousands, millions, hundreds of millions of documents, right, as the base. And just managing and working with 100 million documents is a massive challenge in its own right. And then when you go to visualize that, and you want to see all the detail, plotting 100,000 data points or whatever can become a challenge as well. You're beyond the bounds of what D3 will do, and so on and so on. So we're kind of working, we write code, we're kind of working at a bigger end of the scale, but there are also groups of people and consultancies that work at smaller, more tactical applications too.
Is a lot of stuff you work with at Uncharted text or unstructured type data?
We do work with a lot of unstructured data. So wow, good lead in. But we have done a fair bit of work. I've done a fair bit of work in the past with news in particular. And so that's why, the writing styles and these kinds of things, it's not just purely unstructured. There actually is a lot of latent structure that's in something like news, for example. We also do work with a lot of research documents, right? So analysts are out there, often write a research report, whether it's like an academic research report or internal, there's financial research reports. There's hundreds of thousands of people out there that write research reports. They've got all kinds of wonderful findings and details in there. How do you extract those things and be able to understand what are the kinds of things they're talking about from all of those reports that they've created? So those are a couple of examples of texts that we're using. We've also done things where we've looked at human trafficking. And so human trafficking, a lot of that is adult services. Adult services are ads on the internet. If you take those adult service ads, you can extract things from the text in those adult service ads. You're looking for things like cues, like somebody might be too young or somebody might be moved around a lot as hints of where there might be human trafficking, right? So you're taking this unstructured data and you're trying to create some kind of signal out of it.
Well, I think that's sort of the underlying structure of the presentation you just went through, right? Is not only is it 72 visualizations, but you categorize them into different ways to add structure or apply structure to Alice in Wonderland, right? Which was, punctuation or pronunciation or repetition or what the feeling was in each chapter or who was talking to who. Like you wouldn't look at sales data and come up with all these different ways, like what's the punctuation in the sales data? Like nobody cares, right? You just want to see the numbers, Well, but I think unstructured data, there's so many different ways that you can not only look at it, but learn completely different things from it.
Absolutely. And I think actually the example you just mentioned is the sales data, right? Is you're thinking about the sales that just happened. What about the sales that are in the pipeline? And so in any CRM system, people are spending huge amounts of money on Salesforce and these other tools that are out there for CRM, right? Because it's all about that data that you're collecting leading up to the sale. The sale is quantified. Somebody's buying something for $10. That's great.
That's right.
But what about all the data leading up to that is purely unstructured. It's complete chaos. Lots of people saying different things that are all involved in this. And out of there is a signal of people who are going to buy or maybe going to buy, maybe don't like a certain thing, but otherwise would buy. And that's right back in the structured data problem, in unstructured data problem. And so I think unstructured data represents kind of a frontier. We've done a lot of work in structured data visualization, quantitative data visualization over the last 20 years. I really do think unstructured data visualization is going to be increasing significantly over the next 5 to 10 years. There's a lot of value hidden in there that's latent in there. And, there's people are going to do well when they can get the right signals out of that.
All right, Richard, this has been fantastic. I appreciate your time and you volunteering the talk. Is there any last words or thoughts you want to give to everybody?
I'd like to thank everybody for coming and hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully you can use a couple of the ideas from here. You don't need to use all of it. It's a little bit like working with fonts. For the people who are old on this call and remember when digital fonts first became available in the 1980s, we created a lot of really bad things with way too many fonts happening in them, right? So here we are now talking about text. We've got these powerful tools to work with text. We could end up making a lot of really bad visualizations. So don't try to overdo it. Try to think very carefully about who that audience is, and then use just a couple of these ideas and hopefully make something that's just incrementally another step better.
Great.
Thank you.
This has been fantastic. And like I said at the beginning, I will download this video, and Richard, make sure you get a chance to look at it, but we will post the video with Richard's permission. So that'll be within the next week or so. So, all right. Thanks to everyone. And we will see you next time. Thanks, Richard. And we'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.